The shatter of glass echoed through my hallway at 2:14 a.m., followed by the heavy, confident footsteps of a man who thought he owned me. My father-in-law, Arthur, stood in my living room holding a crowbar and a set of forged real estate deeds, fully convinced he was about to intimidate a fragile, grieving widow into handing over her home. He saw me as just a meek suburban wife who had lost her husband 6 months ago. What Arthur didn't know, what my late husband and I had deliberately kept hidden from his greedy, controlling family, was that before I ever wore a wedding ring, I spent 8 years as a specialized forensic investigator for state law enforcement. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I simply turned on the lights, looked him dead in the eye, and showed him exactly why choosing to break into my house was the biggest mistake of his life. My name is Clara Vance. I am 28 years old, and to my late husband Mark's family, I was always the quiet, submissive wife who kept her head down. When Mark died suddenly 6 months ago, his father, Arthur, looked at me and saw nothing more than a soft, helpless widow sitting in a house far too big for her. He saw a grieving girl he could easily push around, manipulate, and squeeze out of everything Mark had left behind. What Arthur didn't know, and what Mark and I had deliberately kept quiet to avoid endless family drama, was that I wasn't just a suburban homemaker. Before I ever wore a wedding ring, I spent 8 years working as a specialized forensic investigator for state law enforcement. I was trained to analyze crime scenes, track complex financial fraud, and maintain absolute composure in high-risk, volatile situations. I knew how to read people, I knew how to spot a threat long before it materialized, and I certainly knew how to defend myself. To Arthur, though, I was just Clara, the mild-mannered daughter-in-law who served tea at Sunday dinners and smiled politely while he made condescending remarks about women handling finances. The moment the funeral flowers wilted, Arthur's true colors surfaced. He began showing up unannounced, making pointed remarks about family legacy, and how a young woman alone couldn't possibly manage property taxes, home upkeep, or Mark's estate. He mistook my quiet grief for profound weakness. He genuinely believed that if he pressed hard enough I would break, hand over the keys, and let him take total control. He had no idea he was playing a game with someone who had spent her entire adult life dismantling men just like him. It started with subtle, calculated comments, but within 3 months of Mark's passing, Arthur's demands became impossible to ignore. He began dropping by my home uninvited, hovering in the doorway of Mark's home office with a cold, possessive look in his eyes. He stopped asking how I was coping and started asking direct, invasive questions about Mark's life insurance policy, our bank accounts, and the title to the house. Arthur made it clear that he viewed everything Mark owned as family property that belonged under his control, not in the hands of a fragile girl. When I calmly told him that Mark had left the house and all his assets solely to me, Arthur's polite facade completely shattered. He sat across from me at my dining table, leaned forward, and told me that a young widow living alone was an invitation for trouble. He claimed I was out of my depth, incapable of protecting such a valuable asset, and that the respectable thing to do was to sign the property deeds over to him so he could manage the estate properly. He even drafted informal transfer papers, sliding them across the table with a pen, expecting me to sign them on the spot. I looked Arthur straight in the eye, pushed the papers back across the wood, and told him firmly that the house was mine, the estate was settled, and I would not be signing anything over to him or anyone else. His face flushed a deep, angry red. He stood up, towering over me in a deliberate attempt to intimidate me, and growled that weak women don't survive long on their own. He warned me that one way or another he was going to take what belonged to his family line, and that I would regret turning down his generous offer. The sharp shatter of heavy glass tore through the silence of my home at exactly 2:14 a.m. The sound came from the French doors by the back patio. Most people waking up to a break-in would freeze, panic, or let out a scream, but 8 years in state law enforcement meant my body responded before my mind even had time to process fear. I didn't panic. My heart rate stayed level as my tactical training took complete control. I slipped out of bed silently, barefoot, and reached into the concealed safe mounted beside my nightstand. In under 5 seconds I secured my non-lethal tactical flashlight and handheld defense unit. I stepped into the dark hallway, moving with deliberate, silent precision, deliberately keeping my shadow hidden from the floorboards. Downstairs I could hear heavy, confident footsteps moving into the kitchen, followed by the metallic clink of a crowbar scraping against a countertop. The intruder wasn't even trying to be quiet. He moved with the arrogance of a man who believed he was invading the home of a helpless, terrified victim who would be cowering under her blankets upstairs. Using the remote wall panel outside my bedroom, I quietly locked down the smart security grid, disabling the manual release on the heavy front and side doors. The intruder was officially trapped inside with me. I positioned myself at the top of the main staircase, completely concealed by the dark archway, and watched as a flashlight beam flickered across my living room wall. A tall, heavy figure stepped into the light, brushing glass shards off his heavy coat. It was Arthur. He held a crowbar in one hand and a thick leather folder stuffed with forged documents in the other. He took a heavy breath, looking around the living room as if he already owned it. I took a quiet step forward into the open, reached for the main light switch and flooded the entire lower floor with bright, blinding light. "You chose the wrong house, Arthur," I said, my voice completely steady and cold as steel. Arthur flinched violently as the lights slammed on, dropping the crowbar onto the rug with a loud thud. He blinked against the glare, startled for half a second before his face hardened back into that familiar, arrogant sneer. He looked up at me standing on the landing, took a slow breath and forced a cruel laugh. He picked up the iron bar and held up his leather folder, telling me I was foolish to be up here alone. He boasted that no court in the state would take the word of an unstable, grieving widow over a respected businessman, claiming he was here to execute Mark's true final wishes. He pulled out a stack of forged real estate transfer papers and ordered me to come downstairs and sign them right now, or things would get ugly. I didn't flinch. I slowly walked down the steps, my eyes locked on his without a trace of fear on my face. I pointed to the subtle black lenses mounted in the crown molding around the ceiling, high-definition night vision cameras streaming directly to a secure cloud server, recording every word, every threat, and the crowbar in his hand. His smile flickered and died. Before he could process what I was saying, I closed the distance between us. When he raised his arm in a desperate attempt to push past me, my state police defensive training took over instantly. With two swift, fluid movements, I twisted his wrist, disarmed the crowbar from his grip, and forced him down onto the hardwood floor, pinning his arm securely behind his back. He groaned in shock, face pressed against the floor, gasping that I was crazy. I leaned down close to his ear and whispered that I wasn't just Mark's widow. I was a trained investigator, and he had just walked straight into a felony trap. The sharp wail of police sirens cut through the night, growing louder until red and blue lights flashed through my front windows. 5 minutes after I triggered the silent alarm, 2 patrol officers burst through the unlocked front entry. They stopped dead in their tracks, wide-eyed at the scene. Arthur, a grown man nearly twice my size, pinned flat on the floor, groaning in total defeat, while I stood calmly over him with my hands clearly visible. I immediately identified myself, stating my background in state law enforcement and explaining that the intruder had forcibly broken into my residence. The officers cuffed Arthur and pulled him to his feet. His face was pale, his eyes darting frantically as he tried to bluster his way out of it, rambling that this was a private family matter and that I was unstable. I didn't argue or raise my voice. Instead, I walked over to my desk and picked up a neatly organized, tabbed folder I had prepared weeks in advance. I handed it directly to the lead officer. Inside was a complete documented paper trail, certified property deeds, bank records proving Arthur had been illegally attempting to access Mark's accounts, printouts of threatening text messages, and a pre-printed USB drive containing the live security footage of him smashing through my back door with a crowbar and forged documents. The officers reviewed the evidence on the spot, their expressions turning stern as they looked from the folder back to Arthur. I watched the last bit of color drain from my father-in-law's face as the officer read him his rights, charging him not just with felony breaking and entering, but with attempted extortion and grand larceny fraud. Arthur had come to my house to destroy my life, but he was leaving it in handcuffs. The fallout inside Mark's family was immediate and explosive. Within hours of Arthur's arrest, my phone started blowing up with frantic, venomous calls and text messages from his relatives. They accused me of betraying the family, of destroying an elderly man's reputation over a minor misunderstanding, and demanded that I drop all criminal charges immediately. They even threatened to cut me off entirely, as if their approval was something I was losing sleep over. I didn't answer a single call. Instead, I forwarded every threatening message straight to my attorney and blocked their numbers one by one. While the family raged, the legal system moved swiftly. Because I had preserved every piece of digital and paper evidence, the district attorney took Arthur's case seriously. The preliminary hearings revealed that this wasn't just a sudden heat-of-the-moment mistake. Arthur had been orchestrating a calculated scheme for months, forging signatures and falsifying estate documents to strip me of everything Mark left behind. When faced with concrete proof of felony burglary and grand larceny fraud, Arthur's defense lawyer had virtually no room to maneuver. He was forced to accept a plea agreement that included felony probation, hefty restitution fines, and a permanent restraining order keeping him miles away from me and my property. With the legal battle behind me, I finally took control of my own life on my terms. I listed the large suburban house for sale, packed up my memories and prepared for a fresh start. I didn't want the brick-and-mortar reminders of a family built on greed and deceit. Selling the home allowed me to completely liquidate the estate safely, severing the last remaining toxic ties to Arthur and his relatives. Standing in an empty, echoing living room on my final day there, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. I had survived their intimidation, protected what was rightfully mine, and walked away entirely uncompromised. Looking back on everything that happened, I realize how easy it is for people to mistake kindness and silence for weakness. Arthur thought that because I didn't yell, make scenes, or flaunt my past experience, I was someone who could be easily trampled over and broken. He learned the hard way that quiet composure is often the ultimate armor, and that true strength doesn't need to shout to be effective. Standing up to toxic family dynamics isn't about seeking revenge or getting angry. It's about drawing an unbreakable line in the sand and refusing to let anyone cross it. Mark's family expected me to fold under pressure, but by staying calm, gathering cold hard facts and relying on my background, I protected my life and my future. You never have to apologize for defending yourself, your boundaries, or what is rightfully yours from those who try to manipulate you. I hope my story serves as a reminder to anyone facing intimidation, greed, or emotional control. Never let anyone define your limits based on who they think you are. People will judge you by your silence, but when push comes to shove, your actions will always speak louder than their noise. If you found this story empowering, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Always remember, true strength doesn't need to shout until it's time to act.